You're the head of recruitment at the New Saints, but before we come to that, give us a little bit about your background in football.
So I was, originally I went into scouting at Stoke City. I was an academy scout there. So I started with all the younger age groups, working from 7s to 16s. From there I progressed to Wolverhampton Wanderers in a very similar role. And then again in a similar role at Shrewsbury Town, where I became head of academy recruitment for a period of time. Once Mickey Manning, who was the current manager at the time, knew about me, he invited me into the first team fold. They just appointed a head of recruitment to look after first team, so it just, the timing was excellent. So it just meant that I could then be a part of the team that was going out and recruiting players, doing opposition reports. And then when Paul Hurst came in, that process continued. Had a little bit more responsibility in the sense that if there was a player that they needed a decision on, I would go out and give them my opinion. And then obviously when Shrewsbury did very well last year, Paul was successful and moved on to Ipswich Town, as we all know, and it seemed as good a time as any for me to sort of look at my role within recruitment. And fortunately I was offered a position here at the New Saints.
And at what point did yours and Scott Rusco's paths cross?
Scott Rusco and I are childhood friends. We're both from the same area of Shrewsbury, both brought up in the same area, so our paths crossed pretty regularly. I'm a little bit older than Scott, not as I look it, but I'm a little bit older. And we sort of played representative football together at younger age groups, towards the under-18s age group, and obviously Scott's career naturally went off in a different plane to mine. I went through the education route. Obviously Scott came through a plane route, but we've always remained very close friends. In fact, his brother was my best man at my wedding last February. So there's always been that sort of close connection. And naturally, when Scott was looking for somebody to maybe come and fulfil that position, we had a conversation, and naturally I ended up here.
So how much did you know about the New Saints before, John? Because your football clubs that you've mentioned are all in the English system.
That's right, yeah. So New Saints I knew an awful lot about. I mean, I was privy to sort of know Scott and a lot of the playing staff prior to coming in. I had dealings with Ian Williams, of course, over various guises, and I knew exactly what the football club was about. I knew exactly how it operated, and actually since I've come in I've found out even more about how things develop and how the process is behind what the first team does, really.
So now to the present day, head of recruitment, obviously a lot of responsibility there. So I guess, John, first and foremost, you have a network of contacts that you tap into.
Yeah, so I've got a network of contacts, obviously, at a lot of English football clubs, and that's by going around and watching various games, and you get to know different people. And to be perfectly honest, you tend to see the same people in those areas. And then from that, I've also met plenty of agents, and again, I have good contacts with various agencies and individuals within those agencies. So you sort of use those networks to your advantage as much as you possibly can, really. And
do you get lots of telephone calls? John, you really need to look at this guy.
Yeah, it can be very, very busy as a scout. It can also be quite a lonely existence because it's you in the car travelling to games. But you do get lots of tip-offs. And that's something that, you know, if you need to do due diligence with and follow up and ensure that tip is reliable or something that we don't wish to pursue at this moment in time, really.
And as well as the leads that obviously you're given by people that you know in football, do you also go out on your own, as it were, just watching random games to see if anyone stands out?
Yeah, and we have a process. So I will watch anything from Unibond League all the way up even into the Championship, and the reason we do that is A, to get a gauge of the standards that are taking place, and B, to look at any possibilities that might be coming out of those clubs, and C, to sort of get those networks developed and actually spread the word about what the New Saints do. Because if you actually go out in the general public, everybody knows who the New Saints are, and actually within football people are interested about what we actually do. So it's a real positive.
And over time, John, you build up a portfolio, as it were, of individual players. And I guess sometimes from actual signing them to the initial watching them can be a period of months, maybe even years.
Yeah, if you take, Jack Bodnam's the most recent one that's come into the football club. Jack was a player that was flagged to me by somebody that knew him. We then did some remote scouting. So what I mean by that is we did some video scouting, so where we look at his clips, so we've got access to software that allows us to do that. Joe Newton will clip his clips for the manager. I'll do the more in-depth stuff, looking at the actual, the good and the bad and everything else, as we say. And then it's a case of then me picking a game which I can actually go and get my eyes on and see him in person to play, which backs up the opinion that I've already got from watching the clip to see if that is actually true. And on that basis, then I then involve Scott in the decision-making process and say, this is a boy that I think would be excellent for the new Saints. Somebody I think you need to get your eyes on, and obviously ultimately then Scott makes that decision as to what the next steps are.
And there is a TNS DNA that runs through not only the first team but also the academy as well, especially the older groups. But when it comes to the first team and you're recruiting players, it's not just a case of he's a good player, he has to be the right one that fits into that DNA.
Yeah, and you'll be aware, and I'm sure a lot of people are now, of the literature that goes around that. I mean, there's a recent book out called Legacy, which was basically to do with the New Zealand All Blacks, and if you read that in depth, it talks about things such as good characters that leave the dressing rooms in a very good state, for example. And without one, you can't swear on here, but obviously there's a policy that they employ, which basically implies that the character of the person, the individual, has to be the right fit. So many moons ago in football, you could take, I suppose, a maverick sort of character a little bit off the scale to a degree. Now it's about integrating those people, and actually we're not just about producing good footballers here, it's about producing good people as well.
Well, you've answered my next question there, John, because that was the one I was going to ask, because it's not just about what happens on the football pitch for 90 minutes. It's also about what goes on when the lads are together in the dressing room, when they socialise, even when they eat together after training. It's important, I guess, to have that harmony and unity right the way through the system.
It is, yeah, and we look at 4 real key indicators, I suppose. Naturally, there's the technical ability of the player, which is easily seen on a football pitch. Their physical capability, again, which you can assess during a game. Then we'd look at 2 other factors. That's the psychological factor. So, for example, if the team is 1-0 up, what's the attitude like? Similarly, if the team is 1-0 down, does that attitude remain constant, remain the same? Is there a desire to sort of get back into the game? Is there a desire to go and win? Naturally, we want winners at the football club, of course we do. And then there's the social aspect on that. So what are they like away from a football pitch? What's the home life like? How are they settled? And that's we build a picture. And once we have all the information, then we then decide on what the next steps are. And there'll be players that I've got on a database system that Scott won't even know about yet. But that comes in time. So, we have a database probably now that's ever increasing of around, I would suggest at the last count, around 120 players that are on that database, people that I have seen or we have seen.
So those players on the database, I guess you monitor them. They could be at clubs already. They could be coming to the end of their contract. So along with other interested parties, you have to then pursue that particular player, I guess, via the agent in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 ways in which we can do that. I mean, we can go chairman to chairman. So the chairman will speak to the chairman of another football club to express our interest in that player. But we're also very aware that sometimes that information isn't always transcended to the player. So we then will maybe make some contacts with the agent to say, look, this is the scenario. If at any point contractual obligations change or the player is looking to come out of the club at various points, obviously at the end of the contract, because that's the best way to do it, then you sort of make it known that you would be interested in having that conversation. But that's a very targeted list that we would have.
Going to the chairman's an interesting one, because that's obviously at the top with the top in the responding club. So do you have much conversation with Mike Harris on these subjects, or do you have the conversation with Scott first and then it goes to Mike?
Yes, and that's how we would do it. There's always a process. So my role is to identify. I then have that conversation with Scott, and it might be that's the end of it. We might not decide to pursue it for whatever reason. If it's something that we feel we're very interested in, then naturally we would express that to the chairman, and then we let the chairman go and do his thing, which he does very well, of course.
And of course, John, as we speak right now, we are in a transfer window, and I guess it goes without saying, this is a very busy time for you indeed.
Yeah, and emails, telephone calls. I'm having daily conversations with Scott about players. We've got obviously targets in mind potentially, and we just have to wait and see now until the end of the month whether those things come off. I mean, January is a very inflated market. Chairman will naturally put a little bit extra on to make it a little bit more difficult for people, because the majority of them are in contract. So it's their player, so they want to protect their commodity, if you like.
Well, John, thank you for your time today. I know you're very busy. You've given us a wonderful insight into what goes on in the mechanics and the workings of the scouting and recruitment at the New Saints. You do wear a number of other hats as well within the TNS organisation. So, as they say, watch this space.
Thanks, Rev.